So I have the privilege to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Jade Garnou-Fournier, pronouns she, her, hers. She has her doctorate in clinical psychology from Palo Alto University. She interned at UCF Counseling and Psychological Services, CAPS here. And she's also Florida and California licensed psychologist, as well as a registered dietitian nutritionist. Her professional interests include eating disorders, relationship concerns, trauma, transgender and gender nonconforming students, and training and supervision. Her area of center coordination and involvement include eating disorder management team coordination and the trans care team. Her theoretical orientation is integrative, including interpersonal, psychodynamic, and cognitive behavioral therapy. A fun fact about her is French is her native language, and she's bilingual, speaking both French and English. Welcome, Jade. We're excited to have you. Our next panelist is Estefany Rodriguez, pronouns she, her, hers. She has her Master's of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Rollins College and a certificate in marriage and family therapy. She did her internship at the House Next Door, and she's a licensed mental health counselor in Florida and a registered marriage and family therapist intern. Her professional interests include trauma abuse recovery, social justice and multiculturalism, family of origin issues and attachment, multicultural identity development, couples therapy, and first-generation college students and EMDR. Her theoretical orientation is also integrative with relational cultural, existential humanistic, psychodynamic, multicultural feminist, and emotion focused. Her fun fact is she likes self-care best when it happens through arts, language, art, music, museums, poetry, or comedy. She's also bilingual, speaking Spanish and English. Thank you both for being with us today. If you'd like to unmute yourself to say hello and greet our audience, please do so.
Hi, yes, thank you for having me.
Hello, we're so excited to be here. Thank you.
So we've compiled a group of questions to have our panelists answer that we hear often from those who are starting their journey after experiencing intimate partner abuse. Our goal for this Q&A is to start a greater conversation on this topic and raise awareness on what a survivor goes through. So to start off, Jade, can you talk about why may a survivor return to an abusive partner?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very common question that people ask. And the way I'd like to answer this question is to refer to you to a handout that I often give to survivors, which is called the Power and Control Wheel. And you can actually Google it, Power and Control Wheel, and you can have access to a PDF. And what it explains is just how different factors contribute to somebody staying in the relationship and how difficult it is to get out of that relationship. And so some of those factors there's maybe some threat or intimidation that are part of the abuse. And so when somebody's threatened or intimidated, that is really hard to want to do something different. There's also emotional abuse that can occur. And so the person is being bombarded with negative messages about themselves, and they might internalize those and thinking that they don't deserve anything better. And therefore will kind of continue to feel like, well, this is what I'm worth and I'm deserving of, and not necessarily feeling that they're needing to seeking something different. There's also a cycle within the relationship oftentimes where it starts with kind of a building of tension in the relationship. Then we get to the abuse portion, but then it goes back to this, what we call the honeymoon phase, where the abuser, perpetrator will apologize, make promises, be very nice and kind, and really like create this feeling that things will be different, would then create for the other person this illusion that, okay, we can work this through. maybe this time my partner will change and therefore get caught up in the cycle again. Abuse also comes with isolation. And so the lack of having a support system and other people to reach out to makes it really difficult for someone to get out of a relationship if that individual, their partner, is the only person that they are dependent on in terms of either their emotional needs or financial needs, and therefore they feel stuck in that relationship. And then lastly, I think something that's very prevalent is this idea of shame, stigma, and this fear of being blamed for the abuse. And so these internalized feelings can really prevent somebody from seeking support or help and get out of that relationship.
Thank you, Jade. I think you gave such an informative response to that question, and it is something that we do hear a lot. I love that you brought up the aspect of shame and that internalized feeling of why it might be difficult for somebody to not return or stay away from a partner that's abusive. So thank you for that. We're going to move to our next question. So Estefany, what might the healing journey for a survivor look like after being in an abusive relationship?
I think it's important to note that the journey could look so different for each survivor, and the phases in which it happens could be so different, or just the length of time could vary so much that there's not like one right way, right, to heal. And I think it's important for people to hear that, because so often I hear people thinking, well, I should be over it by now. Like I should be able to have a new relationship. That shouldn't affect me anymore. And I think that those statements, especially those statements that start with should, are often based in shame, right? What we think is supposed to be happening versus being accepting of the feelings that are coming up. So some things that I think people maybe aren't aware of as much is that it's really not uncommon after leaving the relationship and being able to feel like physically safe again, for then a lot of difficult and overwhelming emotions to come up and for you to process, right? And it makes sense, because if you're in an abusive relationship, you're so focused on just trying to survive that there's not much mental space to process what's going on, and not through any fault of your own. It's just the situation. And so when you're removed from that, it's almost like a delayed response of processing everything that has happened. And that involves the painful feelings and the disappointment and the sadness. So it's common to feel the shame, the guilt, the sadness after. That's part of the process, but it helps to be able to reconnect with yourself, reconnect with your family and friends. And if you're not able to reconnect for whatever reason, to establish a new support system, maybe other people who have survived an abusive relationship before, or other people who are just other sources of joy, right? To reconnect with yourself and the things that you used to do or the things that you like, and really foster that environment for growth. I think safety is also something that's a big factor after healing, right? Being able to feel safe and to actually be safe, environmentally, physically, emotionally. It might take some time to be able to trust yourself to feel safe again. And it's possible. It's possible to be able to cope with feelings of not being safe, even when you know that you are safe. And then building hope for the future, knowing that things can be different. Just because this is what's happened in the past, it doesn't mean that that's how it will always be. And it can help to do things, one, that you used to like to do, or new things that maybe you weren't able to try when you were in the relationship for whatever reason. And sometimes healing involves a professional, and that is okay. Therapists are there to support you, to be able to help you through your journey. Some things are just a little bit more difficult to deal with on your own, like depression or anxiety, trauma, PTSD. And you absolutely deserve to reach out to a professional for that extra support.
Thank you. That was an amazing response. You gave us so much information about, it's interesting to think about it, that someone's physical safety, their immediate needs, once that is satisfied, that maybe some emotional work like you talked about and processing would follow, and reconnecting, like you said, to yourself and the support that might have been taken from you during that relationship. So I'm appreciative of that response. I think it was very informative. So thank you so much for that. Our next question is going to be for Jade. So how could finding a new partner feel for a survivor after an intimate partner abuse situation, Jade?
Yes, and I really liked Stephanie's response, because I think some of the things she mentioned really ties well into this question. So I would say the first word that comes to my mind is scary. Because it oftentimes healing is also includes kind of reassessing how relationship work, and therefore trying something new and creating a new way of relating to somebody in a way that's healthy, in a way that's communicative and trusting. And so for a survivor, I think finding a new partner will probably take a really long time and will require a lot of patience on the part of the survivor and on the part of the partner. When a survivor has gone through abuse, they've been violated, and therefore it does take time to be able to trust somebody again and heal from those wounds, and therefore it will take a lot of time in order to get to that place. So trust is going to be, I would say, a recurrent theme as the person is trying to find a new partner. Safety, whether it's physical safety, emotional safety, are going to be very critical. And again, to create safety, that takes a lot of time, especially when you've been in a situation where it has been unsafe. It also might bring up some challenges around intimacy, and especially if sexuality was involved and used as part of the abuse. I think that might be an area where somebody might be very guarded in that respect, and will, again, need a lot of time and patience. And I say kind of what Stephanie mentioned. I think each person will go through their individualized process about finding a new partner, and being mindful based on past experiences about what are warning signs that could give them the idea that they are, again, in an abusive relationship. Because when we're used to a certain pattern of relating, I think our tendency as human beings is to repeat those same patterns, because that's what we know, that's what's comfortable. And therefore to kind of be mindful about what our tendencies are and what would be red flags, so that when we're starting a new relationship, we are making sure that we're not falling into the same pattern, and we're trying something that's different and much healthier for us.
Yeah, thank you for that honesty of it being probably a scary step, and that you talked, about wanting to develop safety, which would take trust, which would take time. And then, thank you for also talking about looking at future signs and potentially looking for those warning signs, like you said, for a new partner, if it's something you're not used to as far as a healthy relationship. I think that's really important that you talked about that. So let's move to our next question. We're going to go to Stephanie again on how does culture play a role in processing and healing after intimate partner violence?
I think it can play such a big role in healing after intimate partner violence, and really just in our lives in general. And when I say that, I want to acknowledge that when we think culture, we typically think like maybe not nationality based or ethnicity, like that kind of background, but all of us are parts of, as an intersectional human being, we have so many cultures that are influencing us, right? So it involves our family culture too. What were the values that we experienced growing up? What does our community at large say about how things should be? How do we relate to emotions? How do we relate to each other? So I think all of those things play into one, how we relate to ourselves and other people, and then how we come out of conflict or tense situations. And so I think that it varies, right? So some people might have the experience that they've been told that you deal with difficult things on your own, right? If there's problems in the family, that's a secret, figure it out on your own, no one else needs to know, which can be really isolating. And so that experience is going to be different afterward in healing than maybe for the person who has had support from family members and community members the whole time, who has a whole community who's invested in their safety and in their healing. So those things are important to recognize, as well as like spirituality and what some of the values there are, right? It could be a really strong source of faith and help you get through those tough moments in the healing journey. And there could also be certain messages that are told to you about how to deal with difficult things that could be helpful or not so helpful sometimes. So I think it plays a big role. And I feel like I've just mentioned some of the ways in which it can impact negatively. And I want to make sure that I highlight that it can also be such an amazing source of support and provide so many opportunities for that reconnection that I was talking about earlier, to yourself, to other people, to your faith and whatever that may be. So it depends. I feel like I say that a lot as a counselor.
No, I can see that. I mean, we don't want to overgeneralize these responses, but I think that you've given such a great response that culture is within all of us, and how you talked about being intersectional with it, and that there's a lot that comes into it, and it's how we were brought up, it's how we view our values, how we view our relationships. So I'm happy that you talked about the positive and the negative aspects of it, because I do think we see that within our office as well. So we're going to move to our next question for Jade. How does LGBTQ plus survivors' journey look different from heterosexual survivors?
Yes, I would say same and different. So there are a lot of similarities. And I think something very important to understand is that intimate partner violence occurs in any type of relationships. And it's not just occurring for cisgender heterosexual women. It happens also in monogamous relationship, in other relationship, in trans relationship, and LGBTQ relationship. And so just kind of staying away from that narrow understanding of that experience. However, I would say that especially for the LGBTQ plus population, there are additional stressors or variables that could make getting out of that cycle even more challenging. And some of them will include, so already being part of a minority status, you are more likely to experience harassment, discrimination, abuse. So just statistically, you're just at a higher risk for that. And as a result of that, it can also become, to some extent, normalized if you've already been so used to being discriminated, to being harassed, that being in a relationship with that's part of the dynamic is just another one of those experiences. And that makes it even harder to kind of step out of it and say, oh my God, this is not healthy. I don't deserve that. Also, based on history and how the LGBTQ plus population has been treated overall by different systems, whether it's police or legal systems, there's a reduced trust in help seeking. And also there's lack of resources that are specifically geared for this population. So for instance, a lot of the shelters that are available out there do not cater for trans individuals. And so if you're trying to get out of your home and you know you're going to need a shelter or you're going to be homeless, and there's no options for you, you're less likely to want to get out. Internalized homophobia or transphobia can be also used as a tool or a tactic by perpetrators to keep the person in the relationship by kind of compounding on a person's own feelings of shame and low self-esteem. I specialize in working with the trans population, so I also kind of am very aware of how that population is being impacted. But somebody could use tactic around receiving gender-affirming care, and so threatening, if you don't stay in a relationship, I won't pay for these services, or you won't have access to your HRT, or being able to have healthcare so you can get your surgery. So that can kind of be utilized, unfortunately, as a weapon. And then another tactic that's often used is disclosure. So for some individuals, they're not out, as gay or trans or queer, and the partner could utilize that tactic of I'm gonna disclose that information. If you leave, you're gonna be forced to come out, and then with all the ramifications of the coming out involves, and that can be some fear tactic that can keep somebody in the relationship for fear of the access to healthcare, etc. So I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's definitely, in terms of this relationship dynamic, very similar. And at the same time, I think there are added stressors that I would say make it more challenging, which in my opinion requires additional support for this specific population that I really wish there could be more out there. And if that's something that you're wanting to kind of pursue, that's definitely an area that's needed. I think you've got so many different things that the population is talking about because to me, because of those things just added very obstacles that they have to face on top of the abuse experience. So very informative. Thank you so much. And on November 18th, at 3 p.m., me and another fellows will actually focus on interpersonal violence specifically related to the trans community. So if you're interested in that particular topic, please join us. There'll be advertisement through you said November 18th? Yes, November 18th. I'll be there the one specifically on interpersonal violence will be on the 18th. Okay. So for our session, we're going to have this one one nice right recognized men groups.
Like you're about to discuss it, the same area to recognize wrong, something content. So it's leading to a love recognize the person that is counted, but no counter fever. I think it's it's the same part. There are some external expectations like we talked about earlier, culturally, the family and community about, but it needs to be separated from a person. If there are children involved, it could be a little bit more complicated because people have certain views about what kind of home a child should grow up in. So they may do things like sacrifice themselves in order to provide a specific thing, even the same basic needs support, like they may seriously homelessness or able to provide food or transportation or keep employment. And so sometimes they're left with the choice of being back in that environment and being able to have access to those things, or be out of it and be safe from that particular experience, but then have those things. And that's a very an environment that was abusive as well, and becomes normalized, and it's hard to believe or have hope for things to be different in other. I think it's harder to come out of that pattern because it's familiar. It's not ideal, but it's familiar, and there's some comfort in familiarity. I think afterwards it can be difficult, one, because sometimes it's able to trust ourselves, so able to trust our gut and to recognize what's going on. But then if our trust ourselves, when we do notice some warning signs or some red flags of potential abuse in future relationships, so that becomes difficult because you might notice something and then second guess you're noticing, and that becomes really complicated because it's like noticing the things. It could be resources like actual physical resources, home, immigration status. There could be so many reasons. Thank you so much for talking again for answers to this. It's a lot of different things I think what you kind of touch on. So our last question is going to be coordinate. So how can I preserve the feelings of guilt, shame, or lack of confidence after being in an abusive relationship? Sure. So I feel shame kind of running based on that is wrong and I am wrong. And so part of that is to be able to be in an environment and surround yourself with individuals that are going to lead you and are going to validate your experiences. Not sort of anybody fault, because sometimes that's not part of the narrative of, well, it's my fault, I'm an extrovert, and if I have done X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen, etc. So really something validating, normalizing how challenging it is to get out of a situation like that and how it can happen to really anyone, regardless of their cultural background or their values. You could all end up in this situation can be really helpful. Also, I think it's really important to empower the individual and for this individual to engage in activities or hobbies that will bring them a feeling of empowerment, of autonomy, of drive, because those things were taken away during that relationship. And so often if somebody wants to support a survivor rather than telling them what to do or providing advice, sometimes speaking up with them, as was discussed earlier, that's the huge part, like learning to be able to trust your gut and your judgment and decision-making process. So allowing somebody to make those decisions for themselves, even if it's tempting to kind of rescue them or fix the situation for them, in the long term, it's going to be much more effective if you kind of come from a much more validating and supporting rather than advice-giving type of approach. And of course, these things take a long time. I think that I really don't want to minimize happening in your daily living. But it's definitely possible to cultivate, to overcome these things and change your relationship with yourself so that you become more kind and compassionate and you trust yourself. Empowering responsibility. I think that just that we do here is I'm appreciative that you went over everything. It does take time, but it is possible. So at this time, we discuss some important topics on the healing path a survivor may walk after being in an abusive relationship. So I'm going to go ahead and read the following scenario, and then we're going to have some discussion afterwards. So Jennifer has dated Jose since middle school. Jose followed Jennifer to UCF while she pursued school. Jose has abused Jennifer emotionally, physically, and psychologically throughout the relationship. Jennifer has ended the relationship but is struggling with feelings of betrayal, guilt, and shame. Jennifer has considered returning to Jose but is fearful, as when they have recoupled after a break in the past, the abuse has always escalated. Jennifer has also started to see someone new and is feeling bored in the relationship, as if it feels like there's a passion between them. Jennifer's family also wishes they get back together, as Jennifer and Jose's families are very close and attend the same church. So at this time, our chat is going to be open to allow public comment from you all. As well as a reminder, if you'd like to be unmuted, you just need to use the raise hand icon to request to be unmuted or make a comment or ask a question, and our chat moderator, Mandy, will go ahead and unmute you. So after reading the scenario, we'd love to hear what you all think. I know that we've just gone through those questions and those answers from our amazing panelists. So please participate. Feel free to give your thoughts and comments on this, as well as panelists. If you'd like to join in, we'd love your insight as well. So to start off our discussion, we'd like to ask you, what makes Jennifer's situation difficult? So remember the chat box, you can go ahead and put your comments in there on why you think Jennifer might be in a tough situation, and use the raise hand icon if you'd like to be unmuted. We'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, so we have one chat that came in.
And it reads, her family wants them to get together and their families are close. Yeah. Another check from it. So Jennifer does have so much history that it can be difficult to let go of their courtship, even though he hasn't treated her right. That's a very important point that to be made, that they've been together since middle school. That's a long time to have been with somebody to have developed a relationship. Very difficult. That was a great comment. Any other thoughts on the situation that Jennifer is in? All right, we'll move to the next question. How can Jennifer cope with her feelings? So if we look back, it says that she's fearful. She's also struggling with feelings of betrayal, guilt, and shame. So what do y'all think about those feelings and how she might handle them? Any thoughts? I know we had a question on this. Panelists, feel free to jump into if you have any comments. Any ideas? All right, you got one. Talk with a friend. Maybe try support for some of that was definitely something that was brought up in our Q&A on how the isolation can be difficult. So reconnecting support is going to be a great way to cope. So reaching out with a friend, joining support groups, another thing that was mentioned that could be a good way to work through that. We also had some chat about seeking professional help. So our panelists definitely touched on that. Is that this is a really tough situation to handle. It can be really heavy and that you can seek added support through reaching out to a professional help, or a counselor, or any other ways that may support you in this difficult time. So we have another question. What concerns does Jennifer have right now? So you mentioned that for a difficult time. What do you guys think Jennifer could be concerned with? Feel free to use that raise hand icon. We'll need to see. Panelists, do you have any ideas on what might be concerning for her?
I think for survivors who might be in a situation where they're dating and they're getting to know people, is that it can feel like if it's new relationships and also feeling you're interesting, it can feel like it's difficult to help from the others to be better. So I can see that, she's feeling bored in this relationship and feel like there's no passion, and sometimes that might kind of elicit this desire to go back to the ex-partner. So I think she may be struggling a little bit with that. And I also wanted to say about the feeling bored that sometimes after being in an abusive relationship, it can feel like that chaos and that instability gets conflated with love and what it's supposed to be like. And so it's important to recognize as a survivor that sometimes it might take a little bit of adjustment to recognize what that excitement and passion looks like for you, again, after a relationship that's abusive.
Yeah, great. Great comment about the chaos, like you said. I think something that is really interesting. We also had somebody kind of group chatting about escalation of abuse might be concerning. I think that is definitely something that Jennifer is probably struggling with. Like Stefan said, maybe going back is hazing with the board feeling of chaos, but at the same time, you're fearful about the cycle of abuse or the abuse happening through it. So one last question is, what makes support look like Jennifer? So she's one for something we've identified, she's going with a lot. How might support show up for her? What are your guys' thoughts? Any ideas, Jennifer? If Jennifer was one of those friends or family members, what do you think you might want to offer them? What would you think you might say to them so that they know support's there for them?
I can definitely jump in on this one. Since Jennifer is a UCF student, she's definitely eligible for CAP services. So there's definitely one route of getting support. Sometimes people are intimidated about going past, especially if there's kind of a lot of stigma around mental health. And so if you are a friend or a peer, it might be helpful to offer to at least go with Jennifer to the counseling center, at least to make the appointment or support them as they're waiting in the waiting room. Of course, while they're seeking therapy, because of confidentiality, as a friend, you would not be sitting in the appointment. But we've had a lot of situations where a friend will go over with their friend as support them. So we do provide brief individual therapy. So Jennifer could be connected with one of our therapists and receive brief individual therapy which is about 4 to 6 sessions on average. We do also have a variety of group, and one in particular that I'm thinking of is the Women's Empowerment Group, which is specifically geared for cis or trans women that have experienced any form of traumatic event. So that could be interpersonal violence. There are other types of traumatic situations, but definitely Jennifer would be a great candidate. And that's a group that meets weekly, and it's typically offered every semester. And oftentimes students stay more than a semester in the group and can really build a support system through that way on a weekly basis. And then of course, we do have our crisis services available 24/7. So if Jennifer is really concerned about her immediate safety or is concerned about the safety of somebody else, whether it's her new partner, they can definitely either call 911 if it's imminent, but if it's more something that can be dealt in a less urgent manner, they can always call our phone number and speak with a therapist in the moment and get some feedback on safety planning, making sure they're staying safe, coping skills, etc. So that's definitely one route that Jennifer could take.
Thank you, Jay. I think it's so important to talk about kind of what the process to receiving health services look like, because I'm sure it can be intimidating. So that's definitely a support option for Jennifer as she is a student, so that she can get that added support. She also reached out to victim services. I know y'all know that most students staff of abuse and victimization, so I was always able to assist students, faculty, and staff, and also refer over to CAP as well for that support for her. Any other ideas on what support might look like for Jennifer before we move forward? All right, thank you all for participating in the discussion. At this time, we hope that you enjoyed this workshop as much as we did. If you're interested in learning more about topics related to intimate partner abuse, check out our website. We have a workshop on different topics within intimate partner abuse every week. So you can go ahead and go to the website and click on our ones. If you have some time left for any last minute thoughts or questions, please feel free to comment in the chat, or if you would like to know any questions, use that raise hand icon on video and we can go ahead and see if we can help. I'm just going to pause here for a moment to give you guys some time if you want to have any questions or comments addressed. Okay, so on behalf of the services, we'd like to thank our panelists, our audience for participating in such a great conversation today on intimate partner abuse. Panelists, please feel free to say any parting words and place your contact information for you or your office in the chat if the audience wants to connect with you and learn more about your agency. Some final words for everyone. Remember, UCF Victim Services is here for you 24/7. If you or someone else experiencing intimate partner abuse, please call or text our hotline to speak with an advocate right away.